It's our frustration episode. Tonight, we'll have some therapy for you for what can go wrong in fantasy baseball. We'll talk about all the different ways you might be frustrated, when to panic, when to act, and what to do. Plus, we'll have our waiver wire picks and injury update as always. Howard Bender of SiriusXM joins us next on the Beat the Shift podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Irvin Guy. How are you, Irvin?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, other than my voice is back to being a little bit hoarse. But otherwise, happy Cinco de Mayo to you, Irvin. Did you celebrate Cinco de Mayo?
Not so much. I mean, the patients, I work in the Bronx, and so some of them do celebrate it there, but I don't really as much.
Sounds good. Well, we have a fantastic show today. Want to welcome our guest to the show, Howard Bender from Fantasy Alarm and SiriusXM Radio. Welcome to the show, Howard.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. Absolute pleasure to get a chance to talk to you.
Absolutely, and happy Cinco de Mayo to you.
Happy Cinco de Mayo to you. I did. I was forced into celebrating Cinco de Mayo because I had Hunter Green active in a pair of leagues, and so, giving up 5 home runs on Cinco de Mayo, I figured, all right, let me just have these 5 bottles of whiskey to take that pain away.
So you took a shot after each home run, I assume, correct?
I drank a whole bottle after each home run. It's a wonder that I'm actually speaking at this moment right now, Reuven.
Good stuff. I'm actually a 3/4 Mexican, so I do celebrate.
What'd you do today?
No, I'm kidding. I'm not 3/4 Mexican.
Okay.
He's far from it.
Just wanted to see how long I could play that joke. Well, I celebrated. I had a burrito for lunch. That was my celebration. Anyways, you've come here for some fantasy advice and some good baseball talk, so let's get into that. So, first of all, we know that, Howard, you're in the same TGFBI league as Reuven. Maybe you guys can give us the update. How are you doing? Are we panicking? What's going on?
Reuven, you want to take this one? Because I got some issues.
You have issues, but I think a lot of your issues have to do with injuries. I don't think you're doing anything wrong per se. I think your problem is just injuries, and that's something that you really can't control. There's very little you can control about that. I'm currently in 7th place, which is not too bad. I was flirting with top 3 for the past couple of weeks, but my hitters have actually gone cold a little bit, so I'm a little bit down now. But otherwise, I'm really happy with where my pitching is. I think I just have issues with my hitters.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely the injury bug. I mean, listen, I took Jacob deGrom in the 2nd round. That was, it was risky to do it there anyway. But there was a point where deGrom looked absolutely insane during the spring. Obviously, well, I mean, we had a pretty slow draft, so we could have probably have taken done the 2nd round like the day before the season opened. Maybe because it just took forever to get this going. But deGrom in the 2nd round, Eloy Jimenez, yeah, I lost him. That definitely sucked. I was doing all right. I mean, I'm short on home runs and RBI in that league, and that's and evidence why. I think my pitching was doing okay until all of a sudden it was like Hunter Green just got destroyed, and the one that really kind of bit me in the butt really for a while here was Chris Woodward not giving the closer job to Joe Barlow right from the start. I mean, I held on to him, so I'm reaping benefits now, but trying to go cheap on the on closers later on and being speculative on that San Diego bullpen before the Taylor Rodgers trade. So I got burnt on that front there. So having to focus on saves during the over the course of the season in a 15-teamer really kind of puts me behind. I'm going to end up having to eat a ton of fab just on working on saves.
Did you take DeGrom in the second round because I took Max Scherzer right before you? Because I drafted right before you, and I took Max Scherzer. If Max Scherzer was on the board, would you have taken him instead of DeGrom there?
I'm trying to remember exactly when the draft started, but that does sound obviously familiar to me on that. You've got a number of guys on your team, Reuven, besides Scherzer, where I think we kind of we kind of overlapped here and there. Trying to look right now. Oh, the big one here, Chris Bassett was a huge poach. I wanted him. Who else did you snag right before me? There were a couple of guys I can't remember. I'm looking at. What's really funny is I'm looking at the odd rounds right now, being like, how did I leave that guy for Reuven? What the hell was I thinking here? Tim Anderson. I gave you Byron Buxton. Jordan Romano, I mean, that guy is just out of his mind with saves right now.
And that he was my target for my number one closer, so I had my eyes on him, and as long as he made it back to me, he was not getting back to you, I'll tell you that.
There you go. Well, tonight is our frustration episode, and we're going to talk about, I guess, being frustrated on your teams, but of course, that's not helpful to be frustrated. It's helpful to talk about how to overcome this frustration, when to know when to roll with the punches, when to know not to panic, when to have a sense of desperation, and what to do about it. So we'll give you a little bit of advice on that. So first of all, the question for you, Howard, is when do you start actually looking at category standings, and when do you actually look at where you are in the overall? I guess, obviously, everybody checks, oh, look, I'm in third place. Look, I'm in fifth place. Everybody looks at it. But when do you really say, okay, this is real. I'm now in ninth place. This is real. I need to do something before I actually get set. And where do you actually look at the individual categories? Okay, I'm really down on homers. Now I got to make a change. I got to make a trade. I got to pick up different guys. I got to play homers guys, not steals guys. When do you do those things, and when do you self-assess?
I mean, it's kind of right about now where we are, right? You go a month through the season. The hot starts are going to start to cool off. The cold starts are going to start to heat up. When the weather starts to change, a little bit, you want to try and see what's going on. But I mean, listen, I'm monitoring my place in the categories every step of the way because, if you fall too far behind, it becomes a real hassle to try and catch up. So if you are lagging, like for example, I'm lagging in saves, and I'm going to need to make some moves there because if I don't, well, then I'm kind of screwing myself over here because, I don't want to. I can get maybe like 1 or 2 points, but I would prefer to end up being in a spot in the category where a handful of saves can give me a 5 or a 6 point jump, something like that. So I'm definitely monitoring it all the time. But like right about now, this is where I want to make sure that I don't fall too far behind, especially when you're talking about just regular flat out counting stats. Like, in whatchamacallit, I'm low in the BARF league, the Bay Area Roto Fantasy League. I've been like floating there between 6th and 9th place this season, but I need home runs and RBI, and if I don't make a move in that soon, in order to enhance these categories, I do run the risk of falling too far back.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with a lot of what you said there. Especially the categories with a low quantity of stats, like stolen bases, saves. I mean, if you're down by 10 saves, that's already meaningful at this point. The general gauge is a month into a season for the categories. For me, for the overall standings, I actually have calculated that over the years, June 5th, so 2 months into the season, is really the day where it gets meaningful. There's a lot of things that can happen. There's a lot of volatility in the first 2 months. As long as I'm not in 15th, if I'm in 9th, 7th, you can bounce around quite a bit for the first 2 months. Once you hit June 5th in general, then it's already time, okay, I'm in 7th. This is a mid-story. I found that the highest correlation, or the significance of correlation really hits June 5th. This year it's going to be June 11th because we're a week later in the season, but to the 2 month point for that. But categories, as you say, is the first month. Reuven, you agree?
No, actually, I don't. I think it's a little bit later than that. First of all, looking at statistical categories, I happen to think that around June 1st is better because a lot of these players, just like Howard, you mentioned, the hot starts are cooling off, the cold starts are starting to heat up, and usually around June 1st is when you'll know what the player is for the entire season. You'll know whether or not they can keep it up. Look at Jazz Chisholm last year. His first 5 weeks, 6 weeks, he was off the charts, and after that,
same as this year.
You can't find them. So I think June 1st is probably the best time to look at the categories and be able to assess that way. I mean, either way, you're going to be looking at the categories when you're going through the fab, and you don't want to fall too far behind in saves and everything like that. And actually looking at the overall standings, I think closer, I'd say, to my birthday, which is June 27th, which is about 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks before the All-Star break, because at that point you'll know whether your team has a chance, because that's when teams start to consider who they're going to trade, and you have to figure out who you're going to pick up, and you'll have a better idea of which players you need to replace, and you can see whether or not you even have a chance of winning the league.
Yeah. It also depends on the category is right. I mean, the power, home runs, you have fewer home runs in April typically than in other months. So there is more opportunity to gain later. Stolen bases is interesting. Most people don't realize this. But stolen bases are actually most plentiful in the first month of April. And then they get more plentiful in the last half of August and in September. With some of the call-ups and different players trying. But stolen bases are actually very important early on because you have much more stolen bases in April than you do in May or than you do in June. So interesting to sparse it by that. Any other thoughts?
I'm screwed and tout then. There you go. AL only. I need speed.
Yeah, it's something you get. Mono leagues are, of course, much more different than mixed. It's also about the just getting the at bats in mono leagues. That's so important.
But you have to also know the Super 2s haven't hit yet, meaning the players, the minor leaguers, some of the other prospects haven't been brought up yet. So there is still a possibility that you'll get more playing time out of those guys and get stolen bases out of those guys.
So I want to talk about some unorthodox strategies, changing strategies midstream. But before we do that, it's time for the Injury Guru's Trivia of the Week.
So just like Ariel mentioned, we are going to talk about some unorthodox strategies or changing your strategies from year to year, how you go about taking on your team during the course of the season. Now, I'm going to give you two player stat lines, two pitcher stat lines from this year. I want to see if you can name that pitcher, okay? Two stat lines for the entire season, cumulative stats. Can you name that pitcher? One pitcher has 31 innings, 34 strikeouts, 3 wins, 2.61 ERA, .94 WHIP. The second pitcher, 31 innings, like the first one, 42 strikeouts, 4 wins, 2.61 ERA, just like the first one, with a .81 WHIP. Can you name those two starters?
Are you asking me? Am I supposed to answer this one here?
Yes, if you can.
I want to say the one with the 41 strikeouts, I want to say is Kevin Gossman. And the other one, I want to say it's Corey Kluber. Just really disgusting and go with that. Am I on either one of them?
No, you're not. Ariel, what do you want to take a stab at it?
I'm going to guess Scherzer.
Scherzer is one of them. Scherzer is the one with the 42 strikeouts.
All right.
But this other pitcher pitched the same amount of innings, exact same ERA, and a slightly higher WHIP. Who's the second pitcher?
How many strikeouts does he have?
34 in 31 innings.
Oh, I think I know.
Go ahead.
Guess
you
also.
take a second guess. Go ahead.
I don't. I'll wait until Ariel makes his guess.
Go first. Go first.
I want to say it's Manoah. Is it Manoah?
It's not Manoah.
It's not Manoah.
Did you mention him already? Is it Chris Bassett?
It is Chris Bassett.
I'm that fan.
Those pitchers are so similar. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we're going to talk about unorthodox strategies. And something that I did in TGFBI and something I've never done before is taking pocket aces. And that's a strategy I've never tried before. And it's something that it changes how you go about the entire draft process and how you go about during the course of the season. During the course of the season now, I'm going to be taking less pitchers because I feel more comfortable because I took Max Scherzer in the second round after taking Garrett Cole in the first round. And my third pitcher, I waited to the 10th round for Chris Bassett. So I bunched up on all my hitting during the remaining 8 rounds. So that was my plan, and it just changes from any other league I'm in because I've never done that before, and it's just very hard to do that. Howard, Have you ever attempted an unorthodox strategy just like this from the get-go, and how did it work out?
So, all right. So I haven't done anything, I would say I haven't done anything unorthodox, recently. Right. But when I was playing, fantasy baseball in the mid to late '90s, I was in a league where I was just like, that was a time where like closers were just crazy dominant, right? You had multiple guys, 40, 50 saves in a year, good solid strikeout numbers, very low ratios. And so I punted, strikeouts and wins completely and said, here's what I'm going to do. Because, it was an auction too. I was like, and closers weren't, considered like, high end guys. So, I ended up, it was a blind bid auction, which is probably most key in this, because what I did was I went after, like $1, $2, $3 blind bids on all of these relievers. And I skipped out on all the starting pitching, and then I put all of my money on offense, and going after at that point, I guess it was like your Vladimir Guerrero and your Manny Ramirez and your Barry Bonds and your Ken Griffey juniors. And so I think I spent a total of like $12 on pitching that like the first year I did it, and the rest of my budget on offense. And I did it, right? Because there was no innings minimum back then in my leagues. They weren't, hounding on that. And I ended up, I won 3 out of the 5 pitching categories, and my offense was just so unbelievably dominant that I was in the top 3 in every offensive category right off the bat. And I did that then for like 2-3 straight years in that league, until finally they were then they added the rule of not allowing me to go all closers there.
Yeah, that's the old Larry Labadini plan, where you just spend like $9-10 on pitching. I used to do when I used to do drafts way back. It was thought of as unheard of to pick a pitcher in the first 2-3 rounds. Starting pitcher in the first 3 rounds? What? Now, of course, if you don't come out of the first 2 rounds with a starting pitcher, you're crazy. But I used to pick Chris Carpenter and Mariano Rivera every year. I'm just going to lock down the best pitcher in baseball at that time and lock down the best closer in baseball. And boom, I had my base. And, then I chipped away offense after that, which is sort of a strategy that I do now. But I started doing that before it was cool. And I used to do well with that one. But in general, I don't like to attempt unorthodox strategies. The only thing I will say is that sometimes you're in a draft or an auction, and you get to a point where it looks like, oh my God, I got no speed. Oh my God, I got no saves. And then you got to make it, or my batting average is terrible. Then you got to make a determination, you know what? Should I punt the category? So sometimes I'll pivot mid-draft or in the middle of the auction and say, all right, screw it. I'm just going to load up on the rest. Forget about that and, just go with that. But I don't like to do unorthodox strategies. Ruben, what about you?
Well, I'm thinking, is it too early now to think about punting categories? I mean, if you had 2 closers and they both got injured and you speculated on other closers, do you at this point punt saves? I mean, you can do what you did. I mean, way back when, I remember watching you do that because we were a lot on those teams a lot together. We used to pick Logan Webb in like the first or second round, and people thought we were nuts.
Brandon Webb.
Webb. Sorry, Logan Webb is actually still pitching now. So it's Brandon Webb, who pitched 1 game, 1 season, like 2 innings, and then was out for the entire season. I remember that because we had him on almost every team. But yeah, I mean, I think it's when talking about whether you want to do it at this point in the season. During the draft is one thing, but at this point, is it too early to start thinking about punting? It's not, I don't think so. I mean, if you think you can crush the other categories and you're doing well in the other categories, at this point, I think you may want to consider punting, just because if your ERA is shot or your WHIP is shot and you just want to throw up 2-star pitchers out there and get your strikeouts, hopefully get some wins out of that, it's not the worst thing in the world to do that. Howard, what do you think? Do you think you could start punting categories at this point?
I think it's too early to start punting a category right now. I think that you can still fight to fix it. Like if you're talking about fixing your ratios and stuff like that, you don't have to just go full blown and go for wins and strikeouts. You can repair your ratios, and you can do it on the relative cheap too. If you can, if you can mine through some of the middle relievers or some of the swingmen, who will eat 2 or 3 innings on some teams, like, a team like the Rays, who, or anybody who uses an opener, or limits guys traditionally to, 4 or 5 innings at this point in the season. I think you can kind of fix that. I don't like to punt too early. You get to a certain point though, right? Like in a month's time from now, like, to go with your June 1st, where you're worrying about the categories. If I'm sitting there in June and it looks like I can only lose at most a point if I punt the category, but if I look at it and I don't think I can gain more than 2 or 3 points, then I will, then I'll consider punting that category and just trying to, work something else. But again, the ratio categories are the hardest for me to just punt, because I do think that you can fix them.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, Howard, it's more about the marginal gains you can get. Not, I don't have any saves, I don't have any steals. Can you gain any points? Are people close to you, or are they not close to you? You have to make a determination at some point. It's probably too early, a month into the season, but again, if you have 0 saves and the next lowest person has 15 saves, it's not too early to say, okay, let's not even try. You really have to check your categories and see what the marginal gain is from that point, and then you can make the determination. I know we did this once, Ruben, in the NFBC, where we were doing terribly. We had Noah Syndergaard, who was out for the year with a lat. We had a couple of starting pitchers that just blew up. We also lost a couple people to injury, so we basically, our starting staff was decimated, and our ERA was torched. And so he said, the only thing going for us, though, on pitching was our closers. We had about 3 or 4 closers, so we were in solid lead. So we said, you know what? How are we going to maximize our pitching points? Let's just forget about ERA and WHIP. Let's just throw volume. Just pick any 2-star pitcher, anybody who's pitching a high innings per start, and just throw them in. We'll gain in strikeouts. We'll gain wins. And that actually took 5 months to do. And lo and behold, we actually finished in second place. We did that because our offense was good and our ratios were shot. And we said, you know what? We can punt the 2 categories, or at least we said, you know what? We're not going to fix the ratios by normal volume. We're going to only fix the ratios by throwing a lot of volume and hope that our next guys are better and can take us down. So you never know when it's too early. Always look at your specific situation. It's probably too early, a month into the season, as Howard said, but somewhere in the middle of May, you're going to have to make a determination of how do you maximize your points? How do you maximize your hitting points? How do you maximize your pitching points? Switch starters. Switch people batting. If stolen bases aren't getting for you, throw an extra guy who hits homers. Batting average is so low, who cares if you throw in batters who don't get on base? You always determine your own league. There's no one right answer. It's always situation determinant, but be the gauge yourself on it.
Well, and I have a question for you, because this is one of our leagues that we have right now, the NFBC league that we're in. We have 4 saves right now for the entire season. 4. Okay? We're ranked 12th. There's a team who's tied with us. There's a team that has 2 saves and a team that has 0 saves. Is it worth it for a team like that? Like, we have, the top team has 22 saves and we have 4. The teams above us, we're going to need to gain at least 5 or 6 saves just to get to the middle of the category to gain any points. Should we continue to play our closers at that point? Do you start throwing out the middle relievers more? Do you start just going into starters? What would you do in a situation like that?
I mean, only a couple saves will help, and we had Ryan Presley, who was injured, so that's the reason why we're really down. I think it's too early in that scenario. Don't look at the top. Like, the fact that the top has 22 and we have 4, top doesn't matter. It matters if we can gain points on the next 4 or 5 guys, right? You agree with that, Howard?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you said 4 or 5 saves, a jump on that, which, takes some time to accrue depending on what they have. But if you have Ryan Presley coming back, and he's obviously going to just jump back into that role, Yeah, I would continue to do that. I think in a month's time, you're going to be looking at it, Reuven, and you're going to be like, look at that, middle of the pack in saves. Glad I didn't punt.
Yeah, I agree. Talking about trading players, because a lot of times, and I was talking with you the other day, Howard, that people constantly ask me, and they ask you also, hey, I'm really desperate, I'm doing bad, should I trade this guy for this guy? And almost always the answer is, why in the world are you forcing this lousy trade right now? The guy will turn it around. Don't panic right now. Do you think that it's too early to be in desperation to trade players? Obviously, if there's a good trade, you're going to want to do it, but when do you feel the need that you got to make a trade to get it going? It's not now. When is it for you?
I guess it really kind of depends on the player right now, right? Like, I mean, if I've got a guy who I genuinely don't believe in and I want to sell high, and then obviously the longer you're holding on to him, the bigger the risk that you run. Like Reuven right now, I mean, yeah, I wish there was trading in TGFBI, because I'd love to see what kind of offers would come his way for Byron Buxton. Like a player like that, I'm dying to trade, because people have incredibly high opinions of him and want to give the world for it. So if it's a true sell high guy, I'm trying to think of somebody else. Taylor Ward. Taylor Ward, I like what he's doing right now, but I don't necessarily believe that he's going to sustain this level of play. Is he that much of a the late bloomer that suddenly we're watching Taylor Ward? So those guys, like right now, I want to try and trade those guys probably right about now, because I don't want to see either one of them go into a cold spell at all. But like if I'm looking for, like if I'm just dealing with injuries right now, and the question is do I trade Juan Soto for a 3-for-1 trade, or try to squeeze some extra value out of it? That kind of a move there, I don't do until much later on in the season. Like, I mean, it's got to be like the dog days of summer, and the move really has to kind of guarantee me the win there. I don't really like trading, big time guys unless I absolutely have to.
I think that it also depends on where you are and how much risk you want to take on. So somebody asked me on Twitter, I got offered Charlie Morton for Kopech. Do I take it? I think it really depends. Like a case like Morton looks bad. Maybe it's injury. Maybe he just needs a little bit more time to recover. I don't know. Morton, obviously, his upside is very high. We can see that he's a fantastic pitcher. In a case like that, you have to look at the risk in your team. If you have a very good, solid team, and you're just saying, okay, well, should I take on Morton for Kopech? Well, I wouldn't take that risk. There's a risk that he's going to still be terrible. There's the upside. I wouldn't take on a risk when you're doing well. If you're in 14th place out of 15, I would take that trade, because what are you going to do? Fall out of 14th place to go to 15th if it doesn't work out? You need a bump. You need something to ignite you, and maybe it's buying low on Morton, right? Like, I think it matters where you are in the standing in terms of riskiness of taking on trades. Does that make sense, Howard?
That makes complete sense. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I want to disagree with you about something, Ariel, but you know what? I truly value your opinion on a lot of this stuff. And I think, it's great to like have the strategy stuff that you guys are throwing down here to keep people from jumping off the ledge. Like that's the crazy thing. Like, and like you said, we get these questions all the time from people, and I guarantee you, Reuven, you probably get them as well when you start hearing people, where they're not so much the sell high, or whatever, but more of like, do I give up on, I'm getting this offer for this guy and he's off to a slow start, and is that going to happen? And we see people just kind of make these panic trades because they don't grasp the amount of volatility that you do see in, even in your standings in the first month and a half, almost 2 months of the season there. So, that's one of the things. What I also hate, and here you go, this is a pet peeve of mine, because I know that we're going to be talking frustration a little bit. Here's a pet peeve of mine. When somebody comes to me and they say, should I make this trade? And they're trading speed for power because they're doing well in stolen bases and they're doing lousy in power. and should I trade speed for power? Yeah, go ahead. If that's what you want to do, if you have the extra speed to spare, go ahead, deal that guy. And then they come back a week later and they're like, man, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't feel like I have enough speed. My guy keeps getting caught stealing. Starling Marte is getting caught stealing left and right. What am I going to do? And then they turn around and they make a trade like just the following week where they trade power for speed and they completely negate what they're doing. They're not giving their players time enough to play. And that's something that kind of frustrates me when they churn over the roster too much.
And trading power for speed at this point, you don't have that big of a cushion in power to be able to trade it at this point. It's still so early on in the season. The standings are still bunched together. You're not going to gain that much. Not only that, if you trade the power away, that person you traded to may even pass you later on, which totally negates what you're trying to do. You have to get the plus minus ratio on what's going on, and there's no reason at this point in the season to force a trade. If a trade comes to you where you think that you can gain in certain categories and it's not hindering you by giving this player to the other team, then by all means. But there's no reason to force a trade unless, like you said, if you're in 14th or 15th place, then you got nothing to lose at this point, right? Because if you're falling behind, you want to try to salvage something, or if it's in a keeper league already and you want to try to help and try to trade for keepers, although it's a little too soon to do that also.
Yeah. I want to come back to Byron Buxton. Byron Buxton is a risky player. He plays all out. He gets injured quite a bit, these soft tissue hamstring injuries all the time. If he's certainly on a per game basis fantastic, but if you're sitting in first, second place right now, I would not seek to acquire Buxton, even if you think a trade is even or even in your favor. It's just the risk. You don't take on risk when you're in a good spot. Just take on bankable volume. And to me, Buxton is not bankable volume. Bankable talent per game, but not bankable volume. It's a game of volume. If you actually sort on the number of points in hitting, and you sort on the number of at-bats of a team in hitting, it's the same. Like the more at-bats you accumulate, almost always that's the number of points you're going to get in pitching, in hitting. Same thing on pitching. The team that has the most innings pitched usually is the team that's acquiring the most points in pitching. So it's volume, volume, volume. Don't hinder it with Buxton.
And Howard, I'm 100% with you. If this was a TGF Bear was a trading league, I would trade Buxton as soon as I get an offer for a power hitter, because I feel that I'm weak in that. And Buxton, I had him out for a week, and then all of a sudden he comes back, he hits all these home runs, he's on my bench, can't do anything about it, and then he comes back and he's missing a day here, missing a day there. And right now my whole offense is basically based on him. If he runs, then it's great, but at this point, I may have an issue because my offense relies on him, and he's such an injury risk that if I had the opportunity, I'd put Buxton out there on the trade block this minute.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I write the article every week, every year I do it. And, it's in the, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago that's right. So I wrote it 3 weeks ago for the New York Post, right? And then Buxton got hurt the morning I wrote the article to submit. So I ended up having to shelf that article and, bang something out for that. But then, then Buxton goes, and he misses a full week, and then he comes back and he starts raking immediately, right? Upon he coming back, I'm like, boom, I got to recycle this article again here because, and people kind of confuse it when you sit there and you talk about, I want to trade this guy. I don't believe that he's going to, stay healthy. They think I'm running down the player. I think you described it perfectly, Ariel, right? He's a guy who plays all out, leaves it all out on the field. I love guys like that. I respect guys like that. When I'm, as a baseball fan, I love it. Buxton's he's got a solid hit tool, right? He leaves it all out on the field. He never half-asses it. And you got to respect a player who does that time and time again. But that's not great for fantasy because he's injury prone, and a guy who plays all out like that puts himself at a greater risk. For reality, I love it. Do it. Make it happen. But from a fantasy standpoint, it's going to happen year after year. You see it time and time again. Doesn't mean I hate the player. I love the player. I love the talent level, but I cannot do it. And I used to sit and draft Byron Buxton in like the 8th, 9th, 10th round every year because I knew that he was going to be a great guy to trade And now, the price tag for him. What round did you get Buxton in? Like in the 5th round, maybe?
Yeah, 4th or 5th.
Let me look that up. I got Buxton in the 5th round. Yes, I got him in the 5th round. And if I can get a 5th round talent back in a trade for him, I would 100% do it. But how about this question? If Buxton lasts this entire season and stays healthy the rest of the season, are you going to still feel the same way about him next year?
I have to. I mean, listen, just because he played one full season in 5, doesn't mean that that's like the plateau for him, right? I mean, I can't, if he puts together a second fully healthy season, well, then I have to, eat some crow. But I mean, I have to go with what the data is showing me right now, and because let's face it, when guys get older and play more games, they don't get younger and stronger, right? I mean, so, it's definitely worrisome at that point. I think the real question to ask me with regard to a player like this is, am I done drafting Eloy Jimenez?
Yeah, it's the same type of thing here. Certainly if we see a year, 2 years of health after it, well, then we see the risk reduced. But till we see that, these are high risk players. I'm not drafting Eloy just because I'm probably not going to get the stats. When he's there, he's phenomenal. But, if he's not, then there you go. By the way, what is Matthew Berry's old baseball saying? Never hustle, right? He always used to say, never hustle. It just hurts me. You could get injured. It's true. Players who hustle, bad.
That's what the Yankees did last year. They told Giancarlo Stanton to run at 80% or 40% or 60% just so he wouldn't get hurt running, so they can keep his bat in the lineup. And it worked. And they kept him out of the outfield for as long as they could, just to keep him healthy. Because if he's not playing, if he's injured, he can't do anything for you. And that's the whole meaning of running at 80% instead of 100%. Like earlier this week, the Mets were playing the Braves. Acuna hit a ground ball to the third baseman. If he was running full out, he could have made it 100%. But he knows his body. He knows he's coming back from something, and he didn't bust it out in the very beginning. And you know what? He would have beaten it out if he busted it, but he also may have re-injured himself. And that's something you want the player on the field. And if they go the extra effort to make it to go the 120% that they're going, great. But if he's to the point of detriment, you don't want him doing that.
So talking about frustration, I'm going to name a couple of situations that you might have on your fantasy baseball team, and maybe you guys can tell us which is the most frustrating for you, which is the least frustrating for you. One is having a ton of injured players on your roster. 2 would be getting blown up by a pitcher. Let's call it getting gombered, right? You take a fringe pitcher. Oh, he's got a good start, and all of a sudden he bombs and it crushes your ERA. How about missing out on a player who had a good start? So you sat somebody and, oh, no, he had a good start. Or maybe he had a 3-homer week. How about overbidding on Fab? Does that frustrate you? What about missing out on a player by not bidding on Fab? Oh, I lost the guy by $2. Which one of these things frustrates you more and which you don't really care about, Howard?
Right? Is there an all of the above kind of a situation here? All right, so the one that frustrates me the most are the injured players because there's nothing you can do about it. Guys get hurt. That's just the way it happens. And if you get a team that gets completely sacked by injuries, that's just the way it goes. I mean, you can't do anything about it. It puts you behind the 8 ball, especially when it happens to a top guy. I mean, just for this year alone, right now, off of 5 teams in total here. Eloy Jimenez, Riley Green, Jacob deGrom, Shane Baz, Jack Flaherty, Chris Bryant, Lance Lynn, Josh Rojas, and Yohan Moncada. 8 guys right there that have gone down, some on multiple teams for me. But I mean, if I were to get the usual or the expected production out of some of these names, these teams would look light years differently. So the fact that I can't do anything about that, that's really what frustrates me the most. I do get a little annoyed as far as the overbidding on Fab, especially if you're playing in a fab league where you don't really, you're new to the league, or you don't know the people all that well. You don't have an extensive experience with them, so you don't often know, what their bidding practices are. And then and then you end up like overbidding on a couple of guys, and that's just that bugs me. But it's just not, that's correctable. Like, all you have to do is just kind of pull back and just leave it at that. And if you miss out on a couple of guys, okay, fine. But, chances are is that you'll find middle ground there. Injured players not being able to do anything about it, that's the worst.
Yeah. Ruvain, what are your thoughts?
I'm not as concerned of the injured players as opposed more to the COVID list, because injured players, I expect players to get hurt. It's been happening more and more in the last couple of years. It's the COVID list when people are going on. You don't know when they're coming off. They don't tell you anything about it, and you can just keep them on your roster, and you have no clue what's going on. So that's the only aspect of the injured part, and hopefully next couple of years that'll go away. We don't have to worry about that as much. What bothers me the most is missing out on a good start from a player, because a lot of times I miss it out, or you miss out. We miss out together on our teams because we overthink things, and sometimes overthinking is not a good thing. Sometimes you just have to go with consistency and just keep the same guy in your lineup. We have Joey Gallo on the team, and we were thinking about sitting him for a couple weeks, and we haven't, because we thought, you know what, we got him to hit home runs. We're either going to live with him or we're going to die by them. That he's not going to hit home runs. We kept him in the league. We kept him in the lineup, and he started hitting home runs for a couple. Not a lot, but he's being Joey Gallo. So, that's the worst part. I just can't stand that. And Howard, you mentioned about overbidding on Fab. I've noticed that in our TGFBI league, you did that just a little bit the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, because I again, I was also, and here you go. You want to talk about COVID frustrations here? So I went away for a week, right? And I was on vacation, and I looked in on Fab that week, and I was like, okay, there weren't anything crazy that I thought I really had to do. But the following week, I came back from vacation dripping with COVID, and it thumped me. Right? I mean, it really, I'm double vaxxed with a booster, and it's still just, it waylaid me. And I was like, all right, I gotta try and stay awake for this Fab, but I can't let, guys slip away. And I did, and I overbid. And I don't want to use the excuse of vacation and them being sick. The excuse, the lamenting is not being as focused as I should have been, and I did that in TGFBI. I also did that the same week in Tout Wars AL, where I overbid on guys because I thought that people were going to be trying to collect some at bats.
Well, I hope you're feeling a lot better, Howard. And I like this strategy of if you overbid, then just blame it that you have COVID. So
blame it on the vid. It's funny. So Adam Ronis and I were sitting there, and we were talking about that on the Ante Up podcast, right? We were talking about how we're seeing guys who are out for 2-3 weeks, and then there are guys who are out for the minimum time, that's the frustration. Right? Francisco Mejia, he's been out forever, right? And it's so that's. I get Reuven's frustration with that, because you don't know how it's going to hit people. And of course, you could sit there and go with the whole vaccinated versus unvaccinated and try and make heads or tails out of that. But just the way it hits people differently, it really just kind of hurts things, because you can come back from it and you could still be, kind of taxed, and your bat speed's not the same. Your pitch mixes, your velocity might be, down a tick or two. So it's really that's definitely, But again, you categorize that as an injury. I'd put that as an injury, sure.
I can definitely see why Reuven's frustrated, because when Reuven sees a hamstring issue, a bone issue, whatever, he knows when they're going to come back. But for COVID, he's got no idea.
Yeah.
Because we don't get the information, right? Is it 7 days? Is it 21 days? We don't know. So he can't even predict it. So it's frustrating for him on the injury side. I'm with Howard on this. The most frustrating thing is injuries, because you just cannot control it. You can't do better. What are you going to do? This guy gets hit by a pitch. What are you going to do? You can't control it. And for teams that you are overloaded with injuries, This might not be your fault why you're doing poorly, and there's nothing you can do about it other than, you try to trade, try to do this, decide who to cut, but there's nothing you can do about it. And I love playing in the NFBC, but I really believe that they should have an IL. With the number of injuries these days, why don't you at least give an extra bench spot for a player to go on the IL? Like, if I have seven guys, all my bench guys on the IL, why is that fair to me? And now I have to actually drop somebody? It seems that the fairness of it should be corrected by an IL. And of course, then they tell me, well, we don't want to take up too much of the player pool. It's too deep. Well, then make it 6 bench spots and an IL. Just make it a little bit more fair. But anyways, injured players for sure the most frustrating. I actually am not frustrated at all by overbidding on Fab. I mean, if I'm bidding on a player and I want him, I'm not frustrated. I'm bidding a number that I think is a good return on investment on the player. If I thought that, oh my God, I just got to bid whatever I want, that's reckless. I'm bidding on a player that I think is going to be worth the money that I'm bidding. So if nobody else wanted to bid that, I'm happy because now I got the player. Doesn't bother me. If I get outbid a player by $1 or $2, that's probably a little bit more frustrating because, you're not guessing the exact dollar, exact percentage. But I'm not bothered at all if somebody outbids me by $50. Okay, so that's fine. He wants to take him for that. I'll take him for whatever number I think is a better return on investment. So there you go. And as far as not starting a player who has a good week or starting a player bombs, to me it's just about you finding the right strategy. If you're changing your lineup too much and you're ending up making the wrong guesses more, then you shouldn't be doing that. You should self-correct. You should have rules on yourself. Train yourself. Okay, if a player is above a certain level, always play them. If not, do the better matchup. And if that's not working, you need to adjust yourself on how to do it. It's not frustrating. It's something that you should be improving on.
Let me hit you with one thing, and just your level of frustration. Let me ask you guys this. I don't know if either of you have Ohtani, but sitting there and watching Ohtani go 7 scoreless with 11 strikeouts and look absolutely dynamic, and knowing that you're in a weekly roster move league and it was a 1-start, it's always a 1-start week with a 6-man rotation basically. Leaving a start like that from Ohtani on the bench for the offensive numbers. What's more frustrating, having to make the decision with Ohtani or just being in a weekly league?
Yeah. I hear that. Personally, I think if you drafted Ohtani in a weekly league, you've basically made the decision that if it's a 2-start week, I'm starting Ohtani. If it's a 1-start week, I'm not starting Ohtani. And yes, I might miss out on a lot of good pitching because he is definitely a rosterable fantasy pitcher. You're just making that decision before the season starts. So you should not be frustrated at all because that was part of the original plan.
No, it's frustrating watching the misstart. It is, as I watched it today.
But not only that, for Ohtani, you're not if you're drafting him as your second pitcher, then you shouldn't be sitting him. If you're drafting him as your third pitcher, then you shouldn't be sitting him. If you're drafting him as your 4th, 5th, or 6th pitcher, and you feel like you have a 2-star pitcher you want to throw out there instead, that's not necessarily a bad idea. But if you're going to throw out one number 4 pitcher instead of Ohtani, and you don't because you don't like the matchup, then maybe you are overthinking things too much, and that may be the issue.
I mean, if you drafted Ohtani in a weekly league, you're drafting him to hit. Right?
Hit, yeah. That's In the league that I have him, that I sat there and watched, it was just I drafted him,
right,
knowing that I was probably going to be leaving him as my utility guy more often than not.
Right. So basically, in this type of a weekly league, the Ohtani pitching stats go to nobody. Period. Because whoever drafting him is not going to pitch him unless there's a 2-start week, or if it's a short week and he's pitching, then you're drafting him. But essentially, his stats are just not available to the entire player pool because no one's playing that way. So I wouldn't be frustrated. What's more frustrating is the rules that you can't use them at all for both, or the daily, that you have weekly instead of daily. But, just because he does good is better. What I would be worried about with Ohtani, if you have him, is that his pitching stats are correlated with his hitting stats. If he gets hurt as a pitcher, he's hurt as a hitter also. In fact, he has more chances of getting hurt, right? Because if he's hurt while pitching, that means you lose all his hitting stats, and so he's double exposed. So there's a risk factor in there, right? So, one more question about frustration and all that is, you're an expert, Howard, and you give out advice on a daily basis. Do you worry that giving advice might actually hurt your ability to do well in fantasy leagues? Maybe people employ strategies against you, or whatever the cause is. Like, how do you balance playing and being the expert and doing that?
Listeners, subscribers, readers, they always come first for me. I've never been that guy. You see sometimes, people accuse DFS guys of holding plays back so they could use them themselves. I've seen guys who, are hesitant to, dole out the free advice like that. My feeling is this is my job, right? This is what my job is, not to analyze this stuff. My job is to make you a better fantasy player. Like, that's why you subscribe. You read my commentary, you read my player evaluations, you ask me for advice. That's what my job is. So if I'm worried about my own leagues more than I am about helping you, then I really shouldn't be in this business, right? I shouldn't, or at least just not communicate with the public on social media. So for me, it's always the people come first. And listen, if I'm playing in leagues with them and everybody's drafting my favorite guys and whatever, it forces me to change strategies and to do things much differently from what I would usually do with them. And so it gives me an opportunity to try out new things. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's people first.
Yep. I agree. Ruben, anything to add?
Yeah, we had that issue when we did our auction in NFBC. We knew people listened to us and they're in a draft, and we see, okay, look, they're following our strategy. They're doing what we want to do. So when they were zigging, we had to zag. Otherwise, we would not get the players that we wanted. We would have actually left money on the table if we didn't do what we did. So we actually changed our strategy during the course of the auction. We do that, and just because we say these players that we're going to go through, like the waiver wire list and stuff like that, we can mention these players, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be picking them up in every single league. It's always league dependent, and we're always going to take the guys that we think will fit our team the best. And some of these guys may not even be available in our leagues, because a lot of these guys we may have taken ourselves earlier on just because we had a hunch on these guys.
Yeah. No, that's true. I never give bad advice, and I always give the best advice I can. I mean, that's just my feeling. To me, I was a fantasy baseball player first before I was an expert or a writer or whatever. The stuff that I write about, stuff that I talk about, is just stuff that I do. So to me, it's one and the same. I do find, though, it does hurt myself in auctions or drafts, because a lot of people, especially with the ATC projections, and I see people on their screens, they're using them. So they sort of have our game plan here. So that does hurt us a little bit, but, is what it is. It's about, to me, winning now is less about finding the players, but more about knowing how to value players and how to put together a team in aggregation, how to de-risk a team, and so on and so forth. Let's do waiver wire here. We'll talk about a couple players each that maybe you want to pick up this week on the waiver wire. Howard, who's a player or two that you think we should be looking at this week?
Obviously it depends on how deep your league is or anything like that. If you're in a shallow league, you're sitting in a 10 teamer somewhere, and you need saves. Joe Barlow, so many people dropped him, because Woodward wasn't giving him the work. So Barlow's a guy there, but for me, I feel like now is the time that if you can get Nolan Gorman off of your waiver wire, like now I think is the time to stash him. And maybe it takes another week or two before, Oliver Marmol, the manager for the Cardinals, before he wakes up and realizes that, Paul DeJong is just, he's like almost an automatic out at the plate at this point. His defense isn't, so great that it would hold down a situation where you could move Tommy Edman over to short and bring up Nolan Gorman and let this kid just, play second base and just, wreck the ball. So I feel like this is going to be one that's going to be more imminent than anything else. So if you want to stash Nolan Gorman, I would do it.
That's a great pick. Ruvain?
I actually have two picks here. The first I'm going to say, with a little caveat that he's already 1 for 13 to start the season. That's Jose Miranda. He was a top prospect for the Minnesota Twins. He's going to get a lot of playing time now at third base because Miguel Sano is out. He had surgery for his knee. He's going to be out at least up to 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. And Luis Arias was placed on the COVID list. So when you just think that Arias will get a whole bunch of playing time now with Sano out, he's not going to. So Jose Miranda will get playing time. And even though he started 1 for 13, like I mentioned, he had in last year in single lane AA, 30 homers with a 344 average. So he has the potential there. He's only 41% owned on CBS leagues. If he's available right now, he's going to get playing time even if he's not doing that great. And he's a guy you can take a risk on if you're into prospects like that. Another guy I'm going to mention is 37% owned in CBS, and it's Andres Jimenez. If you need speed, he only has 1 stolen base right now, so his name may not jump up on you when you look at the stats and everything. But he's played in 21 games, and he's hitting .333 with 2 homers and a stolen base. His MO is to steal, and as he keeps that batting average up, he's going to play more and he's going to steal more.
And we have Luis Arias in a bunch of places. I basically own Luis Arias in every deep league because he's just so flexible and just a great batting average. Jose Miranda, it's a good choice. You know, two reasons why I like him also. Number one, he has a very high contact rate. In the minors, it was like 87%. All the projection systems are projecting him for an 85% contact rate, which is enormous. So there's a high batting average floor. This is a 260 hitter. The fact that he had started the season 1 for 13, I think that'll actually turn around quickly. And they're batting him 5th. The Twins are batting him 5th. That shows the confidence they have. Usually guys get called up, bat him 7th, bat him 8th. Batting him 5th, so they know they're going to rely on him. So definitely him. 2 other quick guys. Harrison Bader, 40% owned on CBS. I have no idea why he's 40% owned. He's pretty much universally should be owned. He has 1 homer and 6 stolen bases in a roto league. Just the 6 stolen bases alone make him super valuable. And by the way, he should be hitting about 20 or something homers this year. If he gets full playing time, which he looks like he's getting, we're talking 20, maybe 25 homers even. 25 homers and maybe 10, 15 stolen bases. That's the upside for Harrison Bader. I remember somebody on Fangraphs once called him a possibility to be Mike Trout. Now, that's a little bit far-fetched, but I can see it a little bit. He's definitely worth owning. The other guy just to tell you about is MJ Melendez, catcher on the Royals, or I should say he's catcher eligible for fantasy purposes. He's only 30% owned in CBS that he brought up, and they're DHing him, so he's a good bat. If you're in a 2-catcher league, I think that this is a must dart. Unless you've got 2 good catchers, you got to pick him up and see what you can get out of him, and already has a couple of hits in the first couple of games. Anybody else to add, guys?
You know, I'll throw out, Tommy Pham, right? Because, I mean, listen, everybody's abandoning the Reds right now, and they look absolutely terrible, and Jonathan India's out for 2 weeks, and Joey Votto's got the vid, and we're looking at that. You know, a guy like Tommy Pham, you know, here's the thing that also I think a lot of people are overlooking. Just when you're talking about the Reds and just how bad they look and the team that's being fielded, also, their first 25 games, they've played 8 home games only. They've been on the road a bunch because when they canceled the first 2 series of the season, those were home games for the Reds. So they've been on the road. They've been terrible. They're going to get more games at home once the season, once the weather warms up and everything gets nice. Tommy Pham he's a son of a bitch. That's it. He's in it for himself, right? Me. I'm playing for a contract here. I want to pad my stats. Yes, there's some injury risk that comes with Tommy Pham, but there is power, there is speed, and now I think is a time where if he's available, kind of see what happens. Grab him and then see what happens and watch over the course of the next week or so. Because the Reds, listen, granted 3 wins as the time of us recording this, they aren't going to be this bad forever. Once they start getting some of their guys back, they will start plating some runs, especially in Great American Small Park. So power, speed, Tommy Pham, so selfish. He says it. Right? He says it himself. He's like, I'm here for, for padding my numbers. That's why he's doing it. So I kind of like a guy like that then.
Isn't it amazing how what helps us in fantasy are selfish players who care about themselves, but if you hustle, that's awful for fantasy. Isn't that amazing?
The irony should not be lost.
It's backwards.
Yeah.
It's backwards.
Right. I used to say like, Bartolo Colon, when, he was on steroids. And he used to ask the question, if you know or you suspect a guy is on steroids, does that actually help you or hurt you in fantasy? I think it helps you.
Except for Robinson Cano. That's all.
Well, I mean, as long as they're playing, it helps you, right? They do better. So even though it's not a good thing that they're doing steroids, obviously, it helps you in fantasy. It's odd, but you have things backwards, and, this is one example there. All right, it's time now for our pitcher preview.
It's the section where we look at pitchers who face the Pirates. Let's see who the Pirates are playing this week.
All right, Howard. Who you got for a pitcher this week?
Because genuinely, I'm picturing you in your Pirates jersey with like the saddest look on your face saying that.
Yeah. On his Chris Archer jersey.
Who, by the way, we started tonight. I have no idea how he got on our team, Ruvain. You'll have to tell me what I was drinking that night. But we actually have Archer in our lineup. Goodness. Why?
Well, he didn't pitch that poorly. He did pitch 4 innings, only gave up 2 runs with 6 strikeouts, and the 2 runs were solo home runs. So he didn't actually pitch that poorly.
I guess. All right, Howard, who's the pitcher you want?
He's not budging on this one here.
No.
You know who I'm going to take a shot on for a 2-starter this coming week? I'm going to go after Noah Syndergaard. Right? He's got a home start against Tampa Bay. Who is, by the time they get to him for that first start, the road trip is lengthy for the Rays. And then Thor goes up north to Oakland. And, I mean, come on, Oakland? Really? Oakland? Like, that's just, Noah Syndergaard, I'm going to take a shot on him as a 2-star pitcher this week.
And he has Oakland the following week as well. My wife forbids me, by the way, to pick Noah Syndergaard in any league from now on. She was a big, big Thor fan, and now that she left New York, she's very frustrated. So I'm forbidden. All right, Ruvain?
Yeah, well, I got a couple of 2-star pitchers that I'm actually interested in and maybe available, especially in deeper leagues. Martin Perez. His last 3 starts, this is for Texas, 20 innings, 13 strikeouts, a .45 ERA. And his next 2 starts is Kansas City and Boston, which is not too bad. He's only 10% owned in CBS, so he would be available. You want to take a dart? There's a good dart there. And I'm also going to mention the annual month of the Gomber Bomb week. I'm going to pick Austin Gomber here. He's 2-start at San Francisco and at home against Kansas City. There's a theme here against Kansas City. His last 3 starts for Austin Gomber, 18 2/3 innings, 20 strikeouts, a 1.93 ERA with a 2-1 record. He's only owned in 27% of CBS leagues. He's a guy that if you're willing to, hopefully not get Gomber, he's the guy you can go after. I'm going to double down another guy who I mentioned a couple weeks ago, and it's Michael Pineda. He has 2 starts this week. You still could get him cheap probably because he's only 31% owned in CBS leagues. His 2 starts are against Oakland and Baltimore, both home games. So it's not that bad of a start for him. And another guy who's a 1-star pitcher is Dane Dunning. In the last 3 weeks, he has 22 strikeouts and 21 innings with a 3.43 ERA. His whip is a little high at 1.29, but he's only 18% owned, and his 1 start, again, is against Kansas City. So there's a theme there, as you see, because Kansas City hasn't really begun hitting that much. Then maybe if you can't get guys who pitch against the Pirates, you can get guys who pitch against the Royals.
Ruvain, usually pick somebody that I picked. None of your guys were on my list this week. Interesting. Awesome. I got 3. Chris Paddock is 50% owned. This guy's gaining steam. He's been fantastic so far. 3.15 ERA, 1.10 WHIP. He's finally got his 3rd pitch. which he hasn't had in his career, and that's really setting up well. He's against Cleveland this week, and then next week he's at Kansas City. So a couple of good starts to roll with. I think the Twins are doing fantastic with starting pitching this year. So take a look very seriously at Paddock, who's been always a favorite of us. How about Cole Irvin? Now, he might be injured. I don't know if he's going to make the start, but he's at Detroit this week, and if he is still healthy, 2 starts against Minnesota and L.A. next week. He has a 2.93 ERA, 1.16 whip, so worth in moderate depth leagues. And I'll give you one guy who's facing the Pirates, Tyler Anderson on the Dodgers at Pittsburgh. The following week, he's actually against Arizona, so maybe you can even, if he has a good start, maybe you can even keep him the following week, so check him out. All right, let's do a mailbag question or two. So right away, BPV asks, will I regret dropping Brendan Rodgers from Miranda? I hate these regret questions. I mean, you play the game, you're going to make errors, you're going to make good things. It's whether you do one more or the other, but I like Miranda over Rodgers, who looks lost. What about you?
I like Miranda as well. I know, Rodgers hitting the home run today is obviously that's where the question stems from. I think that question probably hit Twitter about 4 seconds after Brendan Rodgers hit a home run.
Of course.
Yeah. So, listen, I think that there's good power upside with Miranda. I mean, Reuven gave you a great breakdown of who he is and what we can, hopefully expect out of him. The slow start, it's a slow start. It's no big deal. You just the funny thing is you churn over that roster, right? You have all that, you get all those garbage stats from Brendan Rodgers, and then all of a sudden, you turn around and you, then you get the bad end of Jose Miranda, and it's always tough to kind of pile up like that. But listen, I prefer Miranda for sure.
Are we 3 for 3, Reuven?
I'm going with Brendan Rodgers here.
Oh.
He actually, he's playing in Colorado. He was the number 3 pick in the draft way back, but he was a top prospect, and these top prospects recently have been taking some time to actually get going. So I actually think him, because Jose Miranda, he can be a Jared Kelenic this year and just not do well at all. Be there for 2 months, kill your batting average, and then get sent down toward the end when Snell comes back. So I'm going to go with Brendan Rodgers because we know what we're going to get out of Brendan Rodgers in the majors, while Jose Miranda is still a question mark.
I'm disagreeing with you, Reuven. The Rockies are terrible with prospects. Miranda has an 85% contact rate. I think he'll be fine. So
even
all right.
Middle infielders, and the Rockies are pretty good with middle infielders. Look at the middle infielders they got: Trevor Story in the past, Troy Tulowitzki. They've had a good track record with middle infielders.
All right, let's see what happens. Board bet here. Uncle Omar asks, Tatis Jr. was dropped in a 12-team online championship league. What would be your strategy for this week's fab bids? Ooh, what would you do, Howard?
I mean, if you find yourself in a position where you're like top half of the pack in the standings, and you can you think that you've got the horses to withstand eating that bench spot and just waiting for Tatis to come back, I as a second half surge, I think it's it's big. So I think if you think that you can weather the storm right now, stay near the top part of your standings, then I'm gonna be aggressive on fab to grab Tatis.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would do. Reuven?
I guess I'm going to have to disagree here. I actually think that you're only going to get maybe 2.5 months out, maybe 3 months out of Tatis. And if you break the bank on him, and let's say he comes out there, he's still an injury risk. He still has that shoulder injury that hasn't been dealt with. He's been dealing with the fracture, so that hasn't been dealt with. If he gets injured again, you would have blown so much fab on him that it handicaps you the rest of the season. I would still put a bid on him, a keep honest bid, but I wouldn't break the bank on him.
Reuven, why can you tell us the Padres did not have him elect to do the shoulder surgery? I mean, you've been telling us that he's going to need it at some point. Why not just do it now? I mean, the Padres, it's going to be tough for them to win. They're holding off anyways for most of the year. Why didn't they just do that, get it over with?
I think they think that they have a chance of doing well in the league in their division this year. If they stay in the division, if they're not so far out of it when it's time for him to come back, he's going to play. But if they start to fade like they did last year, I think they may just tell him, get healthy, get better, and they punt this year because it's a risk that they're taking for this season. They're playing for now. They want to play for now, which is great. But if they see they're not going to get anywhere, and there are two teams like the Dodgers and the Giants who are better than them, and then they have no shot because their pitching is always injured, then maybe you hold off on him and let him get completely healthy because he'll always have this hanging over his head until he does the surgery. And that's something that all Padres fans are going to be thinking about until he actually has the surgery.
All right, Ruben, what's the rest of your injury update for this week?
All right, well, let's start with the Padre. Blake Snell, he had his second minor league rehab start this past week. He could be activated sometime next week, which means that Mackenzie Gore or Nick Martinez may lose out on time. It depends on what the Padres want to do there, so we'll see how that works out. Andrew Vaughn was placed on the IL with a bruised right hand after getting hit by a pitch. We don't know how long he's going to be out for, but when people get hit by the pitch on their hand, it can zap their power even when they come back, so that's just something to watch for. Gavin Sheets and Adam Engel may get more playing time in the meantime. Another injured guy who's been out for a long time, that's Kyle Lewis. He hurt his knee last year. He had knee surgery. He's currently doing a rehab assignment, but the GM, Jerry DiPoto, actually said that he's going to spend the full 20 days on the rehab assignment. So when he comes back, he's probably going to play because Mitch Haniger does not have a timeline when he's going to come back from his injured ankle. He has a grade 2 sprain, which can keep him out up to 2 months. So if Kyle Lewis is available on your waiver wire, he's the guy you can grab right now because in a week or two, he will be expensive if he's still there because he's going to get a lot of playing time. Two other players I want to mention, Teoscar Hernandez, he should be coming back sometime this weekend. He's in the course of a rehab assignment. As long as there are no setbacks, it'll be fine. And other people who are coming back this coming week, hopefully, Nick Lodolo, he's set to start this Saturday. Matt Manning, he's on a rehab assignment. He may come back in the following week. Sonny Gray, he made a second rehab assignment. He may be coming back soon. And Yohan Moncada is expected to be activated this Monday.
There you go. Howard, Yohan Moncada this Monday. Solved one problem.
That really, yeah. I actually thought that he was going to be back this week, right? Yeah. And I actually activated him. He was originally expected to return, I think they were like Thursday for the weekend games. And I was like, all right, I can, deal with like, it was either like Nick Gordon or Yohan Moncada. So I was like, let me just activate Moncada. Burned.
But he was still dealing with soreness last week. That's why they didn't activate him right away. They wanted to be 100% because they didn't want to re-aggravate it.
Yeah, I know. Thanks.
Yeah. Ruben and I cut Moncada a couple weeks ago in a 10-team league. We've got tons of third baseman, corner infielders, so forget it. We'll just not deal with him. But there you go. Howard, thank you so much for joining the show today. I thought it was a fantastic discussion on being frustrated and some good waiver wire picks for this week. Thank you for joining the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Reuven, I'm coming for you in TGFBI. Might take me a little while, but I'll make my move.
I'll be sitting in 7th place waiting for you.
So, Howard, we mentioned that you're on SiriusXM. That's pretty much daily. And you also do the Ante Up podcast with Adam Ronis. Anything else I'm missing?
No. Weekly column in the New York Post.
Yes, I read that.
Comes out on the weekends, on Saturdays. And then, everything, I do a daily roundup and some MLB best bets over at fantasyalarm.com. So still grinding, baby. Still grinding.
Absolutely. I was supposed to meet up with you at Citi Field, but it got rained out a couple weeks ago. That was frustrating.
We got screwed on that one for sure.
Yeah.
I was very bummed about that. Adam and I were actually talking about that on the Ante Up podcast, that we didn't get a chance to hang out with you at the game.
Yeah, terrible. I'm going to go to my first Met game of the season in a couple of weeks. But yeah, that's frustrating. What can you do about rain? Rain comes down and nothing you can do about it. Just like the injuries, right? Just got to roll with the punches.
It's the injury of the weather. There you go.
There you go. All right, well, that about wraps it up for our show. Want to thank Howard Bender once again for being on the show. Ruven, as always, on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. We will have another great guest, and we'll be on next week. So tune in then. I'm Ariel Cohen. Follow me at ATCNY, and, of course, Ruven at MLB Injury Guru on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Beat the Shift podcast. See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.